I believe we have Bishop T.D. Jakes with us as well. Bishop, if you are there, can you please give us your thoughts after listening to President Biden's inaugural speech?
I'm overwhelmed. I have so many thoughts about what we've heard and what we've witnessed, particularly painted on the canvas of what we've seen in this past week and over this past year and 4 years. I think that the inaugural speech really spoke to contextualizing this present crisis that we find ourselves in as a nation, and contextualized it with the historical data of what Abraham Lincoln faced, the Emancipation Proclamation. It was striking to me that he invoked memories of the hard-fought battle for women's rights to vote and the tumultuous times through which we've gone through, and the end result of now Vice President Kamala Harris ascending into a position that could not have been dreamed of. It was hopeful. It was encouraging. It was conciliatory. His way in which he finessed handling Vice President Pence being there and acknowledged him and with such warmth and integrity spoke to a dignity and a class that I think America is hungry to see from our leadership right now.
You know, it's interesting looking back at some of the famous inauguration quotes from past inauguration speeches. There is so much that President Biden drew from, as you mentioned, the better angels of Abraham Lincoln's speeches. You know, the call to action that we heard John F. Kennedy say, and so my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. A fearlessness facing the future that we heard from, you know, Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933, arguably another very dark time in American history. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I believe earlier we mentioned Gerald Ford's 1974 inauguration speech, where he said our long national nightmare is over. Sort of a compilation of all of these could be heard in President Biden's words. Caitlin, looking ahead, this is a moment of unity. This is a moment of the country coming together. But we know that there's an impeachment trial looming. We know that there is a virus that has killed 400,000 Americans. We know that there is an economy that is struggling to get back on its feet. So what is the immediate task at hand?
That's right. This is a president who comes into office facing not hypothetical challenges, but very real ones. And he addressed these head on, speaking about the pandemic, speaking about the economy, speaking about our political divisions and this need to come together to be able to get through it. Most immediate is this idea of legislation to address a relief for those who have suffered economically from the coronavirus pandemic. That is front and center of this agenda, in addition to other big items. But I kind of want to take a moment and just think of the symbolism of what we saw just now. I mean, just to reiterate, 2 weeks ago, we saw that riot on those same steps, trying to prevent the very thing that happened today, the peaceful transition of power, the acknowledgement that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the election and are now the president and vice president. We saw 2 weeks ago a ginormous stress test to the fundamentals of our democracy. And that's also something that the president, now President Biden, addressed in his speech. He said, America has been tested and we have come out stronger for it. So this speech today seemed to be an effort to reclaim those capital steps and that moment and that visual and to try to move the country forward. forward. It's a daunting task. Yes, we saw Republican lawmakers there today with Democratic lawmakers, but we know that the country remains divided, and so does our government in lots of ways, even though Democrats now have a narrow control. Biden is going to have to convince Republicans to cross the aisle on several of these big items to get these big things done. And that's why we saw this overture from him today to try to bring the country together, to speak to those who didn't vote for him as well as those who did.
And Bishop Jakes, our nation, of course, is dealing with so much, from COVID-19 and unemployment to the political chaos we just heard Caitlin describe, that violent insurrection just 2 weeks ago at this very same spot. We've been discussing how hopeful President Biden's message is, but is it realistically enough for the nation to begin the healing process?
I think it's naive to think that the message itself will be the cure that we need against the virus of malice and hatred, much less the physical virus that we are fighting today. It would be naive to think that one ceremony or a service would eradicate the years and years of historical complexities that make up this great country that we live in today. However, it does set a tone. And from our leadership, we get a tone through which gradually we hope that it will reproduce itself in the behavior and the character of our country. I think how we proceed from here will require both Republicans and Democrats to come together in a concerted effort, understanding, as Dr. King would have phrased it, the fierce urgency of now. Demands that we put on.
Bishop, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to point out, you were speaking of tone, and I just want to point out what we are seeing is definitely, setting the stage of a bipartisan tone. We are seeing former Vice President Pence and his wife leaving the Capitol. They were bid farewell from the current Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband. This is an important and symbolic moment because, as we know, President Trump did not attend the inauguration. He's the most important member of the Trump administration to be here today. This is an important visual moment. It's a visual of the peaceful transition of power, which means so much in this country. And Bishop, sorry to interrupt what you were saying, but I just wanted to reiterate that your words were playing out on screen what we are seeing. Go ahead.
Well, that is a prime example of what I mean by leadership, the ability to disagree and still have dignity and still have appropriateness is something that we teach our children, and we certainly want to see that in our leaders, and that's what makes us hopeful that this sets a new tone for a different type of discourse. We will always have that discourse. We will always have that debate. That's what makes America great. And we need that debate in order to bring our best selves to the forefront. What has happened in recent times is that the fringes of hatred that have always existed have been called center stage. And what I call success is not to eradicate that hate, but to remove it to the outer fringes where it does not have the center stage, the microphone of this nation, the attention of the press, the voice that it currently has had over the past, I don't know how long. It's always been there. We always knew it was there. Prejudice and injustice and so many other things that plague our society have always been there. And perhaps in the fact that it came center stage for a while, it lost its anonymity and our ability to deny its existence. We can no longer be naive and say that does not exist in this country. It absolutely does, and it exists in every facet of our society. The very fact that we had to purge some of the guards because of their alliances perpetuates an idea that has been hard to convince America, from police officers to elected officials. In every aspect of human life, these ideologies exist, but they cannot rule and they cannot reign. And we must push extremists to the outer perimeters of the face of America and put it in its rightful place by allowing all of us, the right and the left, to condemn hate and malice and violence and the types of things that we have seen center stage and almost applauded in recent days.
And Kenneth, if you are still with us, if you could speak to the significance of the fact that President Trump is not here today. It has been a very, very long time since an outgoing U.S. president has not attended the inauguration of his successor. Can you give us some color around that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because we've been speaking about Lincoln, and it was Lincoln's successor after his assassination, Andrew Johnson, who was the last president not to attend his successor's inauguration. Andrew Johnson, generally considered one of the worst presidents in American history. Also, another impeached president, so another connection to the former president. But, you know, I want to turn briefly, though, to I think that Bishop Jakes has been so wonderful, to the sense of renewal. I think that a lot of people, if they feel like me, felt as we were going through this day. We're talking about a lot of problems. The president mentioned the winter of peril, but what an extraordinary moment in our history, and we just got a glimpse of it there as the Speaker of the House, a woman, Nancy Pelosi, was speaking to the Vice President of the United States, a woman, Kamala Harris, a Black Asian woman. What an extraordinary moment that was impossible to imagine not that long ago, I believe, and certainly not possible for Abraham Lincoln to imagine in 1861 when he talked about the better angels of our nature. He also said at that time, and that's why I think that history drapes this whole event today, he talked about the mystic chords of memory. And I think that's what we've tried to focus on today in looking at this speech. This has been a speech and an event that really talks about those chords of memory stretching back over patriot graves to George Washington and the Revolution and the Civil War and the great, great losses that we've come through over more than 200 years. But we are at a remarkable new moment in our history. Joy cometh in the morning, as the president reminded us. And I think in spite of all the difficulties that we face, I got chills all morning myself listening to these speeches, hearing some of these people, just seeing them. The visuals were extremely powerful today, especially again when set up against what we saw just 2 weeks ago. So I think that the fact that the former president was not mentioned, certainly the predecessors who were there were prominent. They will go later on to Arlington again. Stretching back across those mystic chords, Arlington Cemetery, born out of property taken from Robert E. Lee. So all of this history always comes together in these moments. So I do think it's a remarkable moment when we can think about the dignity and decorum and decency that I think overwhelmed this moment today, at least for me as an observer.
Absolutely. I think for most Americans observing the events today, that is the overwhelming emotion. But of course, Bishop Jakes, President Trump's second impeachment may pose a challenge to uniting the country. How do you believe President Biden can best overcome that obstacle in such a polarized nation?
You know, I think that is too heavy a weight to leave totally at the doorstep of the president. I certainly think he's going to be a critical instrument, but that really plays out across the dining room tables of America, in the workplace, at the water cooler, on Instagram and Twitter, that all of us have a combined responsibility to restore the order and the dignity and the respect and some semblance of unity. We've never been totally unified, but some semblance of unity through which we might be able to go forward. I just wanted to interject that one of the powerful lines that I thought was important as he sent out a message to our international allies and associates, he said, "I promise not to lead by the example of our power, but by the power of our example." I thought that was such a wonderful statement, that we would not be bullies, and we don't intend to bully the nation. When we have domestic trouble of the magnitude that we have, we forget that the world is watching. And that's what I've also been concerned about. The world is watching. When you scale our walls and attack our hallowed grounds, you send a dog whistle out to terrorism around the world and nations around the world, that not only democracy here is at risk, but democracy around the globe has shaken under the tremors of what is going on in America. And I think that we are naive to think that we are in a vacuum, when in reality we set the tone for democracy around the world. And that's why it is so critical that we own that responsibility in every facet, from the White House to our houses to how we treat each other in the public square. All of that is going to be essential in the days ahead to restore order. The images will not be pleasant during this second impeachment. That on one hand, the virus on the other, the images will be troubling. And we have to maintain some hope that we will get through this together. I think the speech reminded us that we've been here before in many ways, but we have to perpetuate that message in our own mouths and our tweets and our social media, and all of us have a responsibility to assist whoever's in leadership in perpetuating a message of hope while we deal with despair.
We all have a responsibility, absolutely. Bishop T.D. Jakes, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.